Hey there, it's Olivia-Savannah here from Olivia's Catastrophe, and today I'm here to talk about matriarchies in books. Specifically, I'll be focusing on two books, and those will be The Priory of the Orange Tree by Samantha Shannon and A Heart So Fierce and Broken by Brigid Kemmerer. I'll focus on this one first and then move around to this one, and we are going to be talking about how can we imagine and create matriarchies. So first of all, I'm going to talk about The Priory of the Orange Tree by Samantha Shannon, and it's no secret that I did read this one and I did not like it. This one is a fantasy world which is actually set in a queendom, and we've got the Queen of Innis, who is Sabran, and it's all about this huge overarching quest and dragons, and it involves a lot of characters, but I'm not going to go too much into it because that's not actually the point of this video. I will try and keep this as spoiler free as possible, and if I do talk spoilers I will cut them out of what I'm saying. But this one is very well known for being a very feminist book and focusing on having a matriarchy as a key and staple feature in this one. Yet when I read it, I didn't really get those feminist vibes, and I wouldn't say that this was a matriarchy. I would say this would be the first matriarchy we'd have after a patriarchy, and what we would attempt to call a matriarchy but still wouldn't quite be there. So one of the examples I want to give for this is that Queen Sabran is the Queen of Innis, and she falls in love with somebody else, and she cannot be with this person because of the fact that everybody wants her to have an heir to the throne. It is very important that she has a biological heir that she gives birth to, and I found it very weird and strange when I started reading this book, because although this is supposed to be a matriarchy and a queendom, Sabran's purpose was so heavily tied to her giving birth, to her having a child, to motherhood. And I found that so weird, because if it was a matriarchy, I kind of would not want that to be the case. I would want it to be that she didn't have to have a biological heir, for example, and that she could choose who she wanted to be with. So yes, I just found it very strange that her purpose as a woman and as a queen was solely tied to the fact that she needed to give birth to an heir. And then as well as that, in this one there are a lot of tales from history and stories from history that interweave itself into the main plot, and a lot of these tales from history focus on and centre on a male and a female character, with the male character being the most dominant one. So when I was reading all of these tales with male characters being the most dominant and prominent people, I was a bit shocked and didn't expect that. However, along the course of the journey we get to learn more about the female's role in these histories and how important those roles are too, and it kind of shifts our dynamic and perspective on a lot of things that are happening in the plot. However, it doesn't strike me as amazing that first the focus was on the men and then later the focus is on the woman. In the patriarchal society we live in today, that is exactly the same history we've been taught. For years we've been taught a history where the male people are dominant and they're the stories that we hear, and only now in the modern day are we unveiling the roles that women have had in history and are learning about that. And that side of things again struck me as more patriarchal than a matriarchy kind of perspective. I see Samantha Shannon talking about this book on Twitter. She mentions the difficulties of writing a matriarchy, and I think those tweets made me realise and think that maybe she doesn't realise that she has more patriarchal elements in this book than she first intended to put in there, and that they are discreet but they are quietly woven in. We do have a lot of female characters, but then we've got one male character, and the way his storyline ends in comparison to the way the female ones end really niggled at me. And all of these things added up for me to feel that this book was less of a matriarchy stuck and to the front and to the forefront of the novel, but more a matriarchy that is still relying on a lot of patriarchal views. And that made me think, can we even imagine a matriarchy? I'm going to put the book down for this. Because we live in a patriarchal society. We are taught elements of the patriarchy or have it ingrained in us from the beginning, even if we try to resist it. So ultimately we are living in a patriarchal bubble, even though we are trying to resist it and push against those boundaries. But because we live in this patriarchal society, is it possible for us even to think and consider what a matriarchal society should, could, or possibly look like? Samantha Shannon did try and do one, and yet I still saw those patriarchal lines blending in to the matriarchy that she created. That said, I need to move on to A Heart So Fierce and Broken by Brigid Kemmerer. This is the sequel to A Curse So Dark and Lonely, and A Curse So Dark and Lonely is a Beauty and the Beast inspired story where we follow Wren and Harper, and again I'm not going to get too much into it because that is not the point of this video. So while I do recommend this series and I did enjoy A Heart So Fierce and Broken, I loved it in comparison to Priory of the Orange Tree, It is only when my younger sister Simone read it and we started to talk about matriarchies, she pointed out to me that there is a very good example of a matriarchy in this one, and I had to agree with her. In the sequel series we get to hear about this other kingdom, Shil-Shallow, and Shil-Shallow does feature in the first book. It's quite a threat to Ren's kingdom, but it was interesting to get a bit more insight into this other kingdom in this one because it is a matriarchy. We have a queen on the throne and she is running. So similarly to the Queendom of Innis, we have a queen who's on the throne in Shil-Shallow, and she is the one who's ruling and getting to decree everything that's going to happen. Now, I'm not saying that Shil-Shallow is a perfect empire or kingdom, because the way that they rule, I'll just leave it there, it's not always the best. However, there are things that the Queen of Shil-Shallow gets to do that the Queen of Innis doesn't. For example, for their royal family, the person who's going to be the queen is not decreed by the age of the children. So if you have your child first, it doesn't mean that they are the one who's going to become the queen. You could have a third child and then decide that they are going to become a queen. This also largely has to do with the fact that you don't have to give birth to a biological heir for them to become queen. It's stated in the book that they get to select and choose their heir, and that means they don't have to exactly be biological. I think if this was a matriarchy, that could be a better way of doing it, because then the queen gets to choose whoever their heir is going to be. They don't have to give birth biologically, and then that means they can love whoever they want and they get more free reign that way. And it was just so interesting to see these women really being the ones in control, on top, and I feel like they do a better job of the matriarchy. However, I do need to say that in A Heart So Fierce and Broken, the matriarchy is not the main point of the novel. It's not a center focus as the matriarchy is in A Priory of the Orange Tree, which also means that because it's not the main focus, there's less room for it to make mistakes. We don't go into too much detail about the matriarchy and how it works and how it's ruled there, so therefore A Heart So Fierce and Broken can make less mistakes, whereas the matriarchy is a big focus in The Priory of the Orange Tree, which means we hear more about it, which means there's more room for mistakes to be made. I don't really have that much more to say on this topic. It was more of a spur of the moment video, but it's just some thoughts that I've been having, especially after not liking The Priory of the Orange Tree. I've really been trying to dig deep into my thoughts and reasons why I didn't like it, and why I can like other fantasy books, which also heavily feature world building and politics, and why those worked for me when The Priory of the Orange Tree didn't. And of course, I'm always thinking about the patriarchy and the matriarchy and women's rights and all of that jazz. So I hope you enjoyed this video. It's a little bit different than some of my others, but I do want to do more discussion videos, so let me know what you thought. Let me know if you disagree or agree with anything that I've said about these books or about the patriarchy and the matriarchy. Do you think we can envision what a matriarchy really is while living in this patriarchal society? Leave me a comment down below. Give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. Hit the subscribe button if you want to see more. And don't forget to hit that notification bell to be updated every time I have a new video. And I'll see you guys in the next one. Goodbye!